Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Python Community News, the show that covers all the non-pipable news around the Python community. I am your host, Jay,
I'm John.
and we have I think a mess of news is the term to use. I'm actually recording live from a remote location in the middle of Georgia, getting ready for a conference next week. But John, how have you been this week?
Been pretty good. Lots of news, especially over the past couple of days. So
Yeah,
I think we have a lot to talk about today.
it's definitely been a really big news week. But yeah, let's take a moment and jump into the news. We got some quick hits, and we'll start with those. The first one is uh, India and Bengaluru has been suffering from some pretty wild flooding for the last few days. And you might be wondering, like, that's environmental news, but like, this is like the San Francisco, it's like the Bay Area of India in many cases, and they've been dealing with overpopulation, and now they're dealing with flooding. So, if you're on that side of the globe and you've been dealing with some outages of services that you might rely on normally, that's possibly why. Let's jump over to the next one, John. What about someone's been messing with my subnormals?
Yeah, so this is a pretty interesting blog post about a fast math compiler option used to speed up compilation of certain types of math operations for a floating point that results in incorrect math. So it's faster to compile, but is less accurate. And this blog author goes through the process of finding out that this was affecting their code, and also finding 2,500 Python packages on PyPI that are also affected by this. It's a pretty interesting uh, post to read. I would definitely recommend anybody that has the time to go check out the details there. And if you are compiling packages from source, uh, don't use these options so that they don't result in incorrect behavior going out to your end users.
Yeah. Do me a favor, John. Go ahead and jump into the next one too, talking about some of Google's fuzzy memory corruption issues.
Yeah, so this is not all that unrelated of a topic. So Google has this program called OSS Fuzz. So open source software fuzz is a program that uses fuzz testing against a bunch of open source projects to identify security and other kinds of vulnerabilities. So these are a bunch of uh, automated tools that run against, I think they mentioned 500 different open source projects looking for vulnerabilities that they're specifically looking for security vulnerabilities, but some of these also pick up regular old bugs as they go. And this particular bug that they found in TinyGLTF resulted in command injection bug. So pretty impactful security issue, and this was due to a new type of um, uh, they call them sanitizers, but a new type of uh, program that they use built into OSS Fuzz to identify these sorts of vulnerabilities that was introduced back in December. Overall, a really interesting project that is being used to make open source software more secure across the board. And they're also accepting new sanitizers into the program. And any sanitizer that gets accepted and finds two security vulnerabilities in one of their projects has a bug bounty attached to it as well.
Awesome. And then we got one last one, which I forgot to add in here, so I'm going to do a quick link there. Yeah, Python releases Python 3.10.7, 3.9.14, 8.14, and 7.14, and this actually covers a kind of a bug that they found that could be used to create a potential denial of service. And it was pretty interesting how they would do this, because most people think of computer numbers in terms of like binary, octal, hex and 32 based things. But if you're just doing base 10, and you could create a large enough like number and then try to convert it to a string, and that would cause denial of service, like that would help bring denial of service attacks because of the complexity of the algorithm. So that's, I mean, to me, that's just, it's one of those things that's incredibly, one, interesting, but also like wild. And it caused them, because it was, easily exploitable, it caused them to quickly go in and patch this. So those are kind of the quick hits. Again, we had a lot of topics, and I want to thank a couple of people that submitted those. One, Sarah Kaiser or Crazy for Pi on Twitter and GitHub, and then also Denny Perez, who I need to get her Twitter handle. So that's Denny Perez 18 on Twitter and GitHub as well. And thank you so much for contributing. You can also contribute too. This is a show that is designed to be for people to go and check out, and if they see something on the news, they see something in their RSS feed, they can then jump in and say, hey, I want to share this with the Python community. You can do so by going to the repo, which is right now it's my repo. That may change soon. We're working on stuff there, but then it's going to be at python-community-news, and you can submit your own topic and go from there. And we also have Denny in the chat. Thank you so much, Denny, for the contributions that you had this week. So we have two big topics that we kind of want to talk about, and some of them maybe from the perspective of uh, beginners in the Python community, and some may be in the form of just people working in the industry. So if you're in the industry, I want your opinion on some of this stuff too. But let's start with that first one from Bloomberg, which is California passes a law requiring companies to post salary ranges on job listings. John, you brought this one to the table, so I'm gonna kick it to you.
Yeah, so this is a pretty interesting thing that I saw that I want your opinion on, because you are not in California right now, but usually are, right? And this is a new law that's been passed by the state legislature there, but has not been signed by the governor yet. So he's got until the end of the month to either sign or veto that. But this will require companies that are based in California to one, publish job salary ranges with their job listings, and two, to publish data about their racial and gender pay gaps for companies over a certain size. So notably, Colorado and Washington have similar laws with regard to publishing salary ranges for job postings already. New York City has one that is going to be coming on the books in a couple of months from now, and New York State also has one that is in a similar situation to California's. So it between between all these different places, it's something like 20 to 25% of the population of the U.S. is going to be covered by laws like this, requiring employers to post salary ranges when they advertise a job. So interested to hear what you think on how that's going to affect hiring and job seeking in California.
So I do wish I would have been able to catch whether this affects whether the company is headquartered in that location, or if the employee, or I guess the recruiting market that they're targeting, is in that location, because I think that could have a difference in a couple of ways. One, a lot of larger companies are based out of Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. So if this is focused on hiring in those areas, I think that this will do two things. One, I think that this will also continue that push for like, hey, let's hire remotely. And I hate to say that as like, oh, companies don't want to disclose how much they want to pay people. But that's kind of the truth in some ways. That's why this law had to be passed. I think the other side of that is if you're targeting the actual employee pool or the recruit pool, that's interesting because I remember seeing companies saying we're just not going to have they're just not going to hire in Colorado. Like we're like you can be anywhere in the US but you can't be in Colorado. At New York being on top of this as well makes it a little harder. Well, New York City at least. And then the state of California, like you said, that's just such a large percentage of like the US tech population pool. I hope that it does a couple of things. One, if they're hiring for remote employees, they have to publish this salary because that remote employee could be in California. So unless they're going to go out of their way to like make this special like, oh, let me check your IP address and based on where you are, we'll put some numbers on the screen or not. I don't think anyone's going to do that. I think that what it's going to do is it's just going to create better pay transparency in general. And I do love the fact that they also talk about the gender and other demographic transparencies as well because our industry is definitely one that has been in many ways plagued by horrible like salary imbalances based on gender, based on race, and a lot of that is, you know, people in diminished groups, me being from one of those groups, I don't tend to often think to ask. I wait for the offer or I wait for them to give me a number and I don't know what anyone else around me is making. And, that tends to go in favor of the company. So I think by doing this in general, you're going to have more and more companies using Python being transparent about it. But I also think it's going to give hope to those new people joining the community as well, because they'll be able to see what that type of role can do for them in terms of salary.
Yeah, so the language Bloomberg uses here is any company that is based or hiring in California.
So
So
both.
yeah, it's both. And what you mentioned a little while back was right. Some companies might just say, okay, we're not going to hire in Colorado, right? That actually happened. Um, that gets more difficult, the more states and the larger population that is covered by this,
Yeah.
right? Because if you say we're not going to hire in Colorado or Washington, California, or New York, that's a pretty sizable chunk of the population that you're now removing from your applicant pool.
Yeah. And that being said, we wanted to kind of talk about a little bit more about the idea of like the different careers and like companies that were available, um, just that get impacted by this, because this isn't just your Fang, or I think we determined that the correct phrasing was Matana now, for all of the companies, but these are companies across the board. So this doesn't just affect tech. This affects tech adjacent, and I say that because a lot of Python developers may or may not be working as software engineers, site reliability engineers. They may be working as, data analysts, data scientists. You might be working in a job like my background is from marketing and then I moved into tech. So you have people that are using Python that can then look and see, well, I'm in this role and this role normally pays about this much and I don't have to go to like Glassdoor and see like the I guess kind of the skew of that. I can I can know exactly what this job is hiring for and the price of it. But on top of that, that gives people kind of a career trajectory. Like, hey, if interns are coming in at this much, seniors are coming in at this much, and like the what's the difference in between? It might make sense to get that internship, go into another industry, work in the tech space in that industry to get paid, and then go back into software engineering and come in. That way, you're not sitting there at one number at one lower level for a long portion of your early career.
Yeah, I think the thing that is kind of remains to be seen for me here is enforcement and how these numbers are going to be accurate in the long term, right? Because um, you kind of have at best right now, someone will advertise a particular salary range, and applicants may self filter based on that. But you may also have these situations where you come in and say, well, I need higher than the max you're advertising, or the company might say the opposite of, well, you don't have enough experience to really meet this tier, and so now we're gonna change the offer. So I think it's obviously in New York and California, these aren't even signed yet, so it's early in this process for sure. But I'm interested to see where it goes, kind of long term.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're onto something there, because when I think of like, okay, companies like to do like what's the spirit of the law, and then like the actual text that's in the law. And what I am almost certain will happen is you will get these vast numbers of like, oh, at the bottom level, it's, made up numbers, it's 10, and at the top level, it's like 90. And like, oh, it all just depends based on your experience. We're going to float you somewhere between this. I hope that's not the case. I hope that this kind of honestly gives people the opportunity to start. I don't want to say like start calling out companies, but being like, hey, if you're required to include your gender disparity, like your gender wage disparity, be like, why is this number, like, why is it just not, if you do this job you get paid this much, and like leave it at that. And I mean, I guess I will come in with a ton of bias, because I come from a military background where there's like a formula that you can follow to know exactly how much someone's getting paid based on how long they've been there and what their rank is and all this other stuff. But yeah, I think that this will be an interesting topic, and I'm glad that we have a ton of time for the next topic. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so uh, folks that hang out with John and I know that this is a topic that comes up every once in a while, and we wanted to talk about it today. There's a microservices company called Lightbend who created this product a few years ago, or almost a decade, or more than a decade ago, 13 years ago, called Akka. And they announced in the last day, or sorry, on the 7th, that they were changing their license. And John, we have this conversation a lot. I'm gonna throw this up on the screen here. But the long and short of it is Akka has decided that after 13 years, they are no longer going to use the Apache 2 license, and instead they are going to go to a BSL license, which is a business focused license, business source license here, that was actually created by MariaDB, another company that kind of made this decision. And they're making their product commercially available with a license, but they're making that license free for any company that makes less than $25 million in annual revenue. But that means also there's a pay, and that also removes the veil of open source. Again, they say source available, which means that you will be able to see the code, you will be able to see how things are made. Uh, but that also means that if you're using it in any way, shape, or form for commercial purposes, you got to pay. Uh, John, I'm gonna let you take first stab at this, because I've worked for companies that have had licensing changes. I can't really speak to the reasonings on that. Honestly, I don't know the reasonings. They made their decisions, but uh, let's start by talking about this license change and what this means for uh, you know everyone raises their pitchforks and says, "Oh no, OSI, OSI! Like, what do we do?" But like, what do you think about this news in general from this company?
I mean, so I haven't used the product itself, but it's not a particularly new news item, right? We've seen a bunch of different products announce a similar kind of thing, right? MariaDB, um, MongoDB, I think did a pretty similar transition.
SSPL, yeah,
Um, yeah, server side public license, I want to say,
something like
is
that.
there something like that? Uh, there are a handful of other other kind of like major players that have done a similar thing. I think a lot of this comes down to um, right, what's your business model,
Mm,
and right, there's this idea of building out your open source product, and then there's the separate idea of running a company, a profitable company based on that thing. Typically, right, that's kind of a support model. Right? You've got companies like Red Hat who uh, really are sort of the one to point to as um, right, how do you really commercialize open source? And it's you provide good support and get people using that, and then help them through any trouble that they run into. Um, I think we're seeing a lot of this in particular over the past several years as you get to these situations where some company might come in and say, "Hey, look, a thing we can host and then sell." Right? I think that's what drives a lot of this decision, and what ends up, uh, really kind of shaping the narrative of why are we doing this, and what what are we hoping to change when we do, right? And this blog post itself talks about sustainable open source, but um, as you pointed out, uh, a lot of organizations that aim to kind of define open source wouldn't agree that this is open source to begin with, whether it's sustainable or not.
right. I I think that what happens is, you mentioned it a little bit in the idea of you have a creator whose thought is, how do I make sure I have as much help making this come to life as possible? Like, we have open source code. We have an MIT licensed repo that is all of the code that runs this project, and we encourage people to contribute to it. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be having like the conversation with people about how you can get more involved in like open source contributing and things like that. So it it makes sense from the creator standpoint to say, forget making a profit at this point. I want to see a thing come to the world. And what happens eventually is this idea that, like, okay, people can't necessarily live off of wanting people to come and support their code. And again, we're talking about a product that's 13 years old here, and I don't know how long the company has been around, but my assumption is probably not 13 years, because they would have made this decision a lot sooner. I think when the idea of how do you, I don't want to say capitalize off of this, but how do you make this affordable? How do you make this something that you can live off of? How do you make this sustainable, I guess is the term. If you're not thinking about that from the beginning, then you run the risk of one of two things happening. Either you wind up not being able to, just because everyone can get your product for free, why would they pay you for it? Or you wind up with other companies saying, I can take a business model and put it behind this technology, and I can make a profit off of it. And you know that's happened in the past. There are plenty of lawsuits on this, and when you have a license that says you're allowed to use this code for everything commercial or not, like they're in their right to do so. And that kind of becomes a challenge.
Yeah, and I'll note that I haven't run a company that builds off of or whose primary uh, product is open source, right? And running a company is difficult to begin with. Running a company where you may not know how to, right, monetize the product you're building, um, difficult more so, and then add the layer of if somebody wants to self-host this thing, they can. Um, you end up starting that conversation on your customers end of, okay, well, do we have to pay for this, or can we do this in house cheaper? Or, right, like you said, um, does some other business decide to come in and say, you've done the R&D here, and now we can scale it up? It's a difficult one, and I think the bigger conversation here is probably around, what is the goal of this company's uh, license? What is the goal of open source here? And do those things align, and should they?
Yeah. One of the things that this, it doesn't really come up necessarily in this post, but I think it's something that can definitely be a part of this discussion, is understanding what a license gets you and doesn't get you, and the many different types of licenses. So let's say if we had a brand new project and we wanted to have people contribute to our project, is a license even required to do that? And I'm asking as the layperson here. And actually, I want your opinion on this, because I've heard things in the past, and I think I've only heard them from a couple of people, but they've all always said the same thing, that people can't even contribute to your project, or at least know that they can contribute to your project, if there is no license.
I don't think that's strictly true. I think people can contribute to a project that doesn't have a license, but right in the U.S. and in many parts of the world, anything that is uh, right, software is subject to copyright. So
Mm-hmm.
the code you write is copyrighted, and if I go and I contribute some code to a project, and I haven't agreed to make it, available under that project's license, that's my code, right? And I can say, well, you're not allowed to use that, um, and I'm very much hand waving that in terms of how simplistic it would be, but uh, certainly. I have contributed to projects that don't have licenses in the repositories, right? I usually follow up, or alongside that will say, hey, can you add a license here? Because I would like to know that I will retain the rights to use this thing that I'm contributing to, and adding value to. But
That's a good
right,
point.
there's nothing that says you can't, right, send a patch to someone's proprietary software.
That's
Um,
actually a really good point of the, it's not even necessarily like, are you allowed to do this? It's, are you contributing to something that you will have the ability to continue using in the future?
yeah, and that's right. That's right. There are, right, the was it 3 or 4 software freedoms, right? And the ability to use your software is one of those. And so there are a few things at play here, I think. There's one, uh, the absence or presence of a license, right? And this is, um, essentially shorthand for yes, I am sending you this piece of code with the understanding that it is going to be licensed the same way as the rest of the code in this project is, right? But then there's also the idea of copyright in software in general, right? Because when I do that, I don't give away my copyright, right? I still own that code. It's just also licensed under the same license that the project is. So, you know, everything that I have contributed to open source projects, right? Authorship doesn't vanish. It's still there, and it makes it difficult for projects to change licenses like this, right?
Yeah.
And you'll see um, you'll see when projects want to change their license. Um, one that comes to mind from a year or two ago is an open source audio editing tool called Audacity. Right, this was bought by a company, and the license was changed, and there were right. It's been a project for decades, and so in order to really do that, you have to either get everyone to agree to the license change, or replace any code that is present that you don't already control, um, and that gets to be a pretty tricky issue, especially when you're talking about like derivative works, right? And you know, does this code that re-implements a particular function in a project um, exist without the original implementation of it? So you'll see in a bunch of cases. Um, I'm blanking on the term for this, but a contributor agreement that says contributor license agreement that says I am not only giving you right this code under under the current license, but I'm also giving you the permission to modify the license in the future.
Hmm. And let's say we're building a product. We're building, Python community news, the app that, you know, scrapes all of the web and then decides to publish it as a service. This isn't a real thing. We're not. I don't have any intention on doing this. John might. I don't know. Not me. But what? How does working with licensed code as a part of your code play as a factor of this?
Um, or I think we're diving into what is the GPL. I think that's
Oh,
essentially the direction we're going here. So
I just use MIT license. I don't know.
um, so there's a couple of different ways you can use code, right? Um, you can pip install something, right? If you're using Python and you've got third-party libraries you want to depend on, and at that point, right, you are using another library, but you're not modifying it, right? You're not redistributing that library. Um, you're not making modifications to it, and then sending it to others as right. This is my version of the thing, um, and so that is uh, a pretty clear cut case um, of not needing to worry about the terms of uh, trying to find the right words here, uh, modification and redistribution of a piece of software, right? So
Mm.
uh, but once you start saying okay, I'm going to um, take this software and I'm going to change its behavior by getting my own copy, and modifying the source code and then sending that app out to other people, right? That's where you get into, okay, this is what the GPL is kind of built around, is this hack of the copyright system of saying, well, once you are modifying a piece of code and redistributing it, the terms of your license say that the rest of your application there is also subject to that same license. And
Hmm.
so, if right, we take our Python community news repository that just pip installs a bunch of stuff and then runs with it. That doesn't actually, um, one, it doesn't redistribute anything to anyone. So we're not making copies of it. And two, we're also not modifying its behavior, right? We're using it as kind of a black box of, even though we can go and inspect the source of these things, we're not doing it as part of the runtime of our code.
Yeah.
But when you start doing that, it gets significantly more complicated, and uh, a bunch of these license changes that you've seen um, do result from companies not wanting to be bound by those copyleft licenses.
And I mean, I guess the other side of that too is when you're bound by copyleft, or when you're bound by any license in general, like the question then becomes, what do I do to make it so that I can escape this? And I think that's where, a lot of people joke about, was it like not Android OS, but like the special form of Java that exists out there. That's like, it's designed to not be beholden to some of the licensing and some of the IP issues that you run into with certain languages and certain in programs. And I mean, that's, if I remember correctly, Python itself is a licensed product.
Sure, yeah. I mean, uh, again, anytime you create something um, like software, it's going to be copyrighted, and Python has its own license. Um, if you go pull up the Python GitHub page, you'll find the Python. I believe it's just called the Python software license. There are a handful of other projects that use it as well, and yeah, if this was a copy left license, then companies wouldn't be able to right, make modifications and then redistribute their own versions of Python. And uh, a big part of the whole issue when it comes to, I am so and so, big tech hosting giant, and I'm going to start offering products X, Y, and Z as services on my platform. Is there's nothing stopping that right now, right? And there are open source licenses that have attempted to do it, but so much of this hasn't been actually tried in a courtroom so far, and it's also a matter of, right, is any of this something that someone cares about doing? And so if a company can get all of the goodwill that comes with saying, we support open source without actually having an open source license, they stand to gain quite a bit in terms of what the community as a whole is willing to kind of contribute back. But right, with a lot of these less restrictive licenses, right, your MIT and BSD licenses, you can just go and spin up a version of a thing, right? Our Python community news show is right, the code that's part of it. Um, Someone can just go and take that and build their own community news show with it, and
I mean, that's kind of the goal.
absolutely. But that goal becomes pretty muddled when you say, okay, we're going to take a whole bunch of investor money, and then uh, 10 years down the line, we got to show them returns, right?
Yeah.
And now you have to figure out, um, okay, investors, look, see how many people used that code you paid for to build their own community news shows. Isn't that enough?
You're
And
telling me that the number of forks is not that's not a good indicator to investors on whether or not that's a healthy investment.
it's an indicator of something. What that something is remains to be seen. Um,
So, so like I mean we're talking about this, on a community podcast because I mean more than anything we don't know who is a part of the community. We have to assume we have, someone sitting on that next great application. If there is a time, and I know you're not a lawyer, we can definitely make those statements. And by the way, John did not know that I was grilling him on license information this episode. That kind of just happened organically, I guess. But to your knowledge, is there any time to change your license? Like, when would that time be?
uh, I want to make sure I understand the question, since I'm
I,
getting grilled here.
I have a pretty liberal license. We'd say I'm using MIT license, and all of a sudden I say, hey, I might have my hands on something here. Perhaps I should, you know, swap it up and make it, a GPL license. Like, is there ever a moment in which doing that makes sense?
It depends on your goal, right? If your goal is to, right, the goal of the GPL is to make sure that everything that benefits from it also contributes back,
Hmm.
right? So the idea here is, um, right, I'm going to use this code in my project, and my project is super valuable because of that code. And now I can't just take that and run. I have to give back, and I have to say, I've modified this code and made it 100 times better, and now the community as a whole benefits from that. And so, if that's what you're aiming to do, if your goal is to get this out to as many people as possible and maximize its value in the world, um, do that as early as you can, right? Because the longer you wait, the more complicated it becomes, right? Because you have, right, additional contributors, and you can't go changing their licenses, right? The licenses for the code that they still own, right? They again, they unless they've signed a CLA, they don't give up any kind of copyright permissions here. So you can't change licenses without their permission. And then uh, additionally, right, if you say, okay, well, we've got this big application, and we've been working on it for years, and suddenly figured out that it can be much more valuable, we'll change the license, 5 years down the line. Um, Everything leading up to that is still covered under that old license. And so, when you see these things that, like, this company's been around for a decade, this open source project's been around for 2 decades. I think Audacity is like something 23, 25 years old at this point. Um, it's not a trivial change to make, and it might be, right, less difficult in practice than it is on paper, but it's still going to make some noise, for the crowds that care about those things.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the big thing is, with this and with many license changes, there are, I guess, multiple sides to the coin. I guess it's technically not a coin if there are multiple sides, more than two. Uh, but you're looking at the perspective of, how do my contributors feel? about this change. Because if they're contributing to something that is free and freely available, and now it's no longer free and freely available, are they getting compensated? I mean, that's a legitimate question. Uh, and then you also have the perspective of your users, which again, in this case, you have a service that was, as most startups run, we have a great idea. It's off the back of open source, and we'll host it for you, and you'll pay, the hosting costs. And then, finally, again, you have that investor kind of interest as well of if I'm putting money into you being able to do this, how do I know that I'm going to be able to make a return on my investment? And I mean, again, a lot of this comes down to if you make those decisions on day one, you can kind of always just say like this is the nature of the product, this is the nature of what we're doing and what we're trying to do. I think for us, our project, we basically said make it free for people to contribute to, make it free for people to listen to, and if we need to get paid to do it, we'll figure out a way to do it as long as it doesn't involve things that we're not okay with. And I think that makes our licensing decision easy of like, oh hey, MIT license, it's relatively, you know, general, it's pretty permissive. It allows people to come in, and like you said, if they want to make, if they wanted to make another Python community news, I think, maybe there's a conversation about change the logo at least, but like they're allowed to do that. And
Yeah.
that just comes with the nature of doing open source work. And also I guess that comes into the idea of what is your license protecting versus what is it not protecting, because I think that a lot of people get confused of like, if I have a logo and I have a code base where that logo is presented and I have a, MIT license, does that mean that people can take my logo and use it? Again, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know the answer to that question legally.
I mean, my understanding is generally no. The artwork is not covered under open source licenses. There are licenses that are more tailored to sharing things like visual art and prose and things that are not software,
It's
right?
more like Creative Commons
Creative
type.
Commons, yeah, all of their different tiers of licensing, right? Share alike attribution, all those things. But yeah, typically your logo is not part of that, part of your code base license. And right, if you go and you look at an open source project like Python, right, the Python logo is not the Python code base. They're different things, and so you can't just go and uh, go and modify the Python logo and use it for whatever you feel like, without and this adds another layer of complexity, because the Python logo is trademarked, right? So trademark and copyright are a whole other conversation. Um, but yeah, it really depends on, uh, again, intent, right? If you are looking to make artwork available to people, right? An MIT license is probably not your best bet because that's not what it was designed to do, right? You go for a Creative Commons version, and you pick the one that is most relevant to how you want your artwork to be used.
I was gonna say, speaking of artwork, what if an AI made it? Like, is that? Uh, don't worry, there's plenty of news topics to hit on that. But I mean, was there anything else you wanted to hit on licensing and licenses?
I mean, yeah, I think there's one thing I want to kind of circle back to, which is, when you see a company that says, right, we support open source, or we, our products themselves are open source, right? How does that affect you as uh, a user of that, or right, maybe an employee, or prospective employee rather?
Me personally, when this one's interesting because I've worked for a company that started as an open source project, product that became a non OSI, but still you could contribute to like that whole thing. And now I work at Microsoft where we use a lot of open source and contribute a lot to a lot of open source. That's actually part of my job is like finding open source stuff and if I can making contributions. I i mean that is definitely a plus in my book, and I think that's what makes this conversation so challenging because I think that you could ask the same question in regard of where did the open source originate from and what's the perception of that source code. Like if a company is selling a version of open source software and it doesn't appear as if, oh no, this is just a licensed or a forked version of this software and we do everything in our power to make it feel like it's something that we did. uh, that becomes hard. It becomes hard to justify. It becomes hard to explain. And I'm trying to think very carefully on how I word things because I don't want an email later. But I know that businesses have to think about their bottom line, and I am not oblivious to that. Um, but I will say the immediate answer to your question is, a company that is using open source, I'm kind of indifferent to a company that is actively contributing back to open source in a way that is very obvious of, hey, these people over here are doing a great thing and we want to support them or we want to contribute to what they're doing. To me, I find that as a net positive.
Yeah, and I think the same kind of thing can be said for community events and other sorts of public goods
Yeah.
that right. I am always much more likely uh, to want to help out someone who's already helping out the community,
Mm.
or especially if they're saying like we want to do more here. That's a great thing for me to hear, and I think there are other people who share similar kinds of feelings.
That's, I mean, I don't think we have enough time to dive deep into that conversation, but like the kind of understanding the complexity that is an open source, not conference, but having a conference with a generally open source mentality to it. Because if I understand correctly, usually conferences deal more with like trademark and like copyright stuff, not necessarily the like technology parts that put those conferences together. But I could see both, honestly.
I mean, conferences deal with hotel block rates and catering contracts, but we can get into that elsewhere.
Spoken like a true conference organizer.
Uh, but yeah, a lot of community run events are share a spirit with open source projects, right? And it's a lot of contributing to the community.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, we are running pretty short on time. I think we have a handful of conferences to talk about that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
We do, and I actually ran out of banner space to put them up on the screen. So I'm going to switch over to my browser here, and we can jump right into those. The first one being PyData Global. PyData Global is happening in December, but their CFP is rounding up soon. So if you wanted to contribute to PyData Global, it's a virtual conference. You can speak from anywhere on Earth. Sorry for people on other planets, I guess, but you can contribute to that. But yeah, get your CFPs in now because we're running out of time. What about
Yeah.
PyCon Chile?
I think PyData Global, you have just 3 days from the time of this live stream. So
Yeah,
you
so
want
by the
you
time
want to
this
come
comes
quickly.
out, you have 2 days. And if you're catching the newsletter, it's the day of, so like hurry.
Yeah, and PyCon Chile is similarly coming up in December, but their call for proposals is open for almost 2 months. So you have until the end of October to get a proposal in there.
Yeah,
So you have a little bit of time, but that time goes faster than you would think.
their CFP just opened. I think it opened this week, so definitely want to make sure that you get your CFPs in. I don't I think this is going to be an in-person event, so definitely shout out to all the people that are in or around Chile that can participate there, or if you can travel, hey, that sounds like a good vacation. Speaking of another a great event, we have ScyPi Latin America, which we actually found out about this from one of the people in chat, Denny, who contributed as well. Thank you so much. But yeah, SciPi Latin America is coming soon. And John, do you have the dates on that?
I do in one of my many browser tabs. Um,
We got a lot of browser tabs open, folks.
so SciPi Latin America is September 26th through the 28th. So that is about 2 weeks from now.
Yep, that is happening very very soon, and I don't think this is the URL for that, or maybe it's still loading. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so be sure to jump onto that. Um, Again, it's already past the time for CFPs, but definitely check out the event when it happens. And then we also have PyCon Portugal, which is happening on September 24th. So in a couple of weeks. So the CFP is definitely passed, but if you're near Porto, or you're near the University of Porto in Portugal, then be sure to check that out as well. Uh, because and it's good that John. I don't know about you, but I've been able to find out more and more about these many different conferences that are happening all over the world. And we do have some news from Denny that PyCon Chile will be online and in person. So yeah, so if you want to contribute or create a talk for the PyCon Chilean community there, you can do so anywhere on the planet, and the talks will be I guess available online and in person, or maybe not. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll just have to talk with Denny and be like, Denny, how to explain this to us. Which, by the way, if you have a conference or you have some news that you want to explain to us, or at least let us know about, again, you can do so by heading over to the GitHub repo on the screen, github.com/kjymiller/python-community-news. Again, that may change soon. We're working on some stuff to kind of make it a little bit easier and give people an exact place to go and contribute both conferences and news topics. Uh, but if you are listening live with us, thank you so much for doing so. Be sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with other people in the Python community. Our hope is that we can grow a global community of people focused on Python and wanting to learn more about what's happening in their community outside of the code base. And if you are listening to this either after the fact on YouTube or through the podcast, then find out about our newsletter. Find out about those other things that maybe you can take this on the road with you. We actually have a brief version of the show that's usually 5 minutes or less. That is just the news. So that is, well, I guess the news and the CFP and conference announcements, uh, all of the things that are coming up or have just recently happened. So be sure to check out that, and you can find all of that information at pythoncommunitynews.com. John, I think that wraps up this week's show, right?
I think we are out of time. Yeah.
We are out of time, and unfortunately, we're not going to have a show next week. I'm traveling. Well, I'm already traveling, but I will not be able to record live next week. But I do know that we have a lot of things coming down in the next few weeks. I think we're talking to some people about Hacktoberfest coming up, and who knows what's going to happen the week that we return. But of course, like I said, pythоncommunitynews.com is the place where you can find all of that information. And there will be a brief next week. So you will still get the news of next week. It just won't come with all of the banter and me grilling John about licenses involved. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for this week's episode. I've been Jay Miller.
I've been John Bonifato.
And thank you for checking out the Python Community News.
See y'all in 2 weeks.